Hi, currently it is 12:15, 1 o'clock p.m. CST, and this is video log 126, I believe. I've been thinking a little bit, as usual. I had to erase my whiteboard because I had a lot of stuff on there I didn't want. I was writing down just a lot of things pertaining to the different perspectives of physics that you can take and whatnot, through a more precise mechanical and quantified perspective, or a more abstracted kind of philosophical perspective from the perspective of fields and whatnot. Of course, like anybody else, there are a lot of questions about physics, and there are a lot of questions pertaining to relativity and whatnot that I'm not too familiar with. I want to read into relativity more. Again, I have derived it mathematically, but I also like having a way of interpreting it from a quote-unquote philosophical / metaphysical point of view. It's just something I like doing when it comes to mathematics, and I tend to get fixated on those things. I actually got way too fixated on the philosophical implications of mathematics when I was in school, and I was to the point where I was actually behind in some of my courses, but I didn't really care too much. I was just writing down. I feel like I have a few questions pertaining to some of the derived equations pertaining to, just very simple equations. Well, I understand Newton's F equals ma to a degree. It's obviously just a simple representation of just a way of, we just like using force as a way of measurement in this world, because you have, of course, you can read. We look at everything from a space and time. You can call it space and time perspective, whatever. They're it's kind of like I was reading into this. Kind of like somebody had a good point. It's like electromagnetism. They're kind of one and the same. They have they're different fields, but they also actually another interesting thing is that fields tend to have their complement as well. Even though they're the complement of fields are the complement of given information, they also have fields also have complements of themselves, because from the perspective of the field, I guess you can think of there's okay, this stuff can be a little bit deep, and I'm actually getting a book on classical field theory to understand fields more from a more mathematical perspective. I think of fields as, how would I say this? You could think of it from I think of fields from a two-dimensional perspective typically. Of course, it depends on how many dimensions you want to give a field, but I'd rather keep it simple and deal with it from a two-dimensional perspective, kind of like a string, kind of like pushing it up and down, and the resultant speed of doing that is constant supposedly, no matter how fast you do it. There's a frequency, but the frequency and wavelength tend to be kind of correlated to the point where the velocity is just constant. So if the frequency goes up, the wavelength goes down, and if the wavelength goes up, then the frequency goes down. Did I say that? I was just getting sidetracked here. But yeah, so that's because that's also another interesting thing. I don't like. It's just but then you have to think about velocity, all of that, and we happen to see that the velocity tends to be constrained. When you think about velocity of a wave along a some kind of medium, the velocity tends to have a resultant tension that can only have a maximal velocity along that field. And I don't really know of a good intuitive way to think of it. But you can see of a lot of examples in the real world, right? Everything, like the transmission of energy within the space-time continuum can only be as fast as light, I think. Actually, gravitational waves have their own quote-unquote tension constant, so I don't think that would affect it. So It all depends on the field or medium that we're talking about. But maybe because Einstein has theorized gravitational waves and how I've mentioned it before. It's kind of like imagining just pushed down a blanket or imposing that particular bit of information on that field and whatnot that's associated with and all that. Of course, now when you think about that, it also has a resultant. Again, it's nature's tendency to harmonize with itself. So when you do that, it has a resultant force, resultant information. I mean, you can think of that again like the truth vectors, or if you want to think of it like that, there are a lot of ways to think of it. It has a resultant force going back because it wants to go back to quote-unquote equilibrium, but its only equilibrium point is when nothing was on it to begin with. So it always wants to go back. I think, I did talk about that. And of course, you can think of like electrons and whatnot. It's like, okay, so, well, maybe the reason why electrons still exist, maybe there is like some kind of degraded information. Maybe over time, the information of that particular electron tends to its scale or amplitude tends to go down, tends to degrade because it's transmitting information. So via the conservation of information, of course, you could think of it like that. And but yeah, I mean, like again, I'm still trying to think of everything from a mechanical point of view and its ramifications from non-duality, right? Non-duality. I always say it's nature's tendency to harmonize, but it's via not. All of it just stemming from the nature of God or nature of God, whatever, the universe. Non-duality is something. Everything that we think of from any perspective does stem from non-duality. It seems so. That's like the one constant in the universe. Or law, like the ultimate law of everything, whether it's pertaining to our physical world or any abstraction that you can think of that's logically concise. It had me thinking, and my head was running a little bit, and I'm kind of ignoring relativity because that also makes my brain fart a little bit. I'm not sure if other, it's. Actually, somebody had a good point about light and all that. They call it the speed of causality, but also the speed of causality tends to occur because of the tension factor associated with that field that is interacting with. I call it tension. It's not really tension, but I'd like to think of it as tension. It would be a better way to say it. It's quote unquote strength value. Again, it's just how it reacts, how the field reacts when it wants to harmonize. It creates these ripples in its environment. And I can't really think of these are definitions that I don't. I'm trying to come up with definitions that encapsulate all of field theory and all that. They have all the. It's basically I'm trying to create a superset of all of it with the necessary. It's a logical structure, right? Like anything else. So these fields, they just kind of, they exist, obviously. So I mean, you can think of the universe as a set of fields, an infinite set of fields. And you can also you can actually map these fields between subsets that can be organized into a particular field with a spectrum of tension variables, or you can call it a variable at this point because it's these different fields or manifestations of that given field that maps under a given instantiation of information, whatever you want to call it. You can logically map these fields in that manner, and you can probably actually explain all of quantum physics in that way, and potentially all of how we see spirituality. And this could be a potential way of understanding the theory of everything. my brain likes to obviously categorize everything. So you have the universe, which contains a set of fields, and these set of fields can be organized from my perspective. You could categorize it from the information it's interacting with, which is obviously infinite. Or infinitely sure, you can have like a spectrum of different kinds of information, and then you can have, I don't want to think about that too much, but there's a way to logically map all this in your head. It's a little bit hard to, but you can, and you can, yeah, and then of course these fields can be simplified, of course, but you can give them an infinite amount of dimensions, but you can also kind of like, anyways, I keep getting sidetracked. Basically what I'm trying to say is that I like to organize my set from first the information that it's interacting with, and then the so you could think of like the information, you could just think of one bit of information or one kind of information, whether it's mass or whatever. It's any kind of information, anything like dog or cat, whatever. Just a variable, basically, and because it scales. But yeah, so then you can think of like the branch points between that variable, which also have like a quote unquote tension factor, a tension variable, which is then mapped that way. It's kind of like a tree almost. So then you can think of it like that. So this is a big tree of different fields that have different tension factors. Like, the not impedance. Well, again, it's tension. It's like you can still think of it as a rope. You can still think of it as a rope, tension in that way. But yeah, of course, you can think of other examples like you can rederive the speed of light from it's 1 over the square root of mu naught times epsilon naught, and these mu naught, and it has to be mu naught and epsilon naught because of the fact that its electromagnetism is defined through two fields interacting with each other, and so they have their own tension factors. One being mu naught, which is, I believe, pertaining to magnetism, and epsilon naught is pertaining to electricity, right? The electric field. And again, I don't know how they derived this. I think Maxwell did this a long time ago, and he saw it from the perspective of a mechanical wave, and then he re-derived those by them having their tension factors, and it ended up being 1 over the square root of epsilon naught times mu naught. And I don't feel like talking about that because you can find that in a book somewhere, so it's pretty easy to do. It's just a partial differential equation, but it's one of the simpler partial differential equations that you deal with in an introductory course in it. So it's like kind of it's something that most people can solve pretty easily. I mean, Maxwell, okay, I wouldn't say pretty easily. Maxwell was the first to do it, and it's easy to look at the logical constituents of how we found the solution for that partial differential equation. So yeah, anyways, what I was saying is basically, yeah, so you have like a superset, and then you have I'm not going to call it just a set, infinite set, of course, and then you can organize them between the information that is interacting with that field. And then once you do that, you could say, but then, okay, another thing is, it's kind of, I say the information, so it's a variable. It's a variable. It's not a constant. And a kind of information. Anyways, yeah, so, and then you think about like the different tension factors involved with this field and whatnot. So, yeah, it's a good way to think of it. Branch it out that way, and then that covers, and then it would branch out infinitely because that's just the nature of reality. But what I'm trying to say is that this is just another way of thinking about non-duality and its constituents, and its need to harmonize due to the fact that everything with an identification has to have its its complement. Like if you have the identification of a field, there's information at this point. There's a field that interacts with it too because of the fact that there's a opposite. There's an opposite negation or whatever. So that means there has to be another field with that negation, and that's why you see electromagnetism and gravitational waves occurring in the world and whatnot. It's kind of so it's negation and all that, and just harmonization basically. And I was just thinking about that, and yeah, I mean that's just a way to model basically all of reality. No matter what kind of reality it is, you can always lead it. No, like, I think, again, maybe I'm a little bit crazy, but it's a homomorphism of seeing reality. Another perception, right? It's not, of course, we can't. When we think about objectivity, there's no real object. I mean, there's no real God. Like if you think about God, right? It's like that. I guess God is the object because it's a conglomerate of all those particular perceptions. So this is nothing more than a logically concise perception of God that works out, that can be homomorphized with other structures, and then all of those other logically concise perceptions of God can then, which is infinite, of course, can then be added together, brought together to then have a more concise picture of what God is. But we just happen to have one very precise picture of what He is, logically concise picture. Yeah, so it's just interesting to me. At least I like to think about these kinds of things, and that's why I'm getting my. I had to text my dad because I don't have that book in quantum field theory, and I just wanted to kind of look at the math again, and I also wanted to look at the math in classical field theory. It's good. I think it's good to have a book on classical field theory since I'm doing this, and you can probably derive most of classical field theory through just seeing it as a rope. Okay, not necessarily. I'm sorry. There are a lot of complicated dynamics within fields, so that's why field theory is very important in seeing how there are just a lot of it's very complicated. I mean, like spinning objects, right? You know, if you think about don't black holes spin? Do black holes spin? I don't know. You can think of any planetary object that spins, like Earth actually. When it spins, it twists the fabric of space-time, because if you think about it, it's just you have all of these objects kind of intermingling, and you could think of them as miniature points, kind of some more dense than others, some less than dense than others. I don't think the Earth is completely uniform, of course, but I wouldn't really know of a good way to explain that, because I would have to just look into those instantiations of the dynamics of fields and whatnot. And so it's good to have a book like that just in case, because in quantum field theory, they probably wouldn't talk about all of that, but they're more interested in the standard model, and they're looking at the more micro scale. They're looking at the more micro scale of the world. And yeah, I mean, sure, you can probably I think particles have spin, so maybe in these fields, yeah, sure, you can probably look at that there's something called twistors. I think they talk about twistors and that, spinners and all that shit. So they probably have all that information in the book that I'm talking about, which is quantum field theory. But I still want to it's still good to have another book just in case if it's missing out on any core conceptual concepts. And yeah, so I guess I'm interested in field theory in general, and how it can be applied to not just physics, but all of reality. And it seems interesting, and it's a good explanation of not a good explanation, but a good example of non-duality, which can be seen as a good explanation, I guess. So I mean, yeah, I think, yeah, organizing sex is very important. Of course, you wouldn't want it to be like randomly spattered. I think the mind also likes patterns, so it tends to tends to enjoy that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think that's also wonderful. A wonderful way of kind of envisioning reality, I guess, would be, for the human mind at least, for the human mind, the mind that we have, we can still come up with a logical, concise homomorphism of what reality is. And yeah, I don't know. I didn't really explain that well of how I organize the set, quote unquote, the set that quote unquote represents God, or reality, whatever you want to call it. I call it God. I know it's all interchangeable, but people, when you say God, you get a lot of atheists who are like, God isn't real, blah, blah, blah. I was like, well, just shut up about that. I was like, why do you still think about those things? Don't you have something better to do? For the love of God. And I said, God again. Yes, God, please help me. I'm not, like, I am only trying to perceive you because of my love for you, God. Just so you know. Don't smite me. And that's where all the atheists come. It's like, what the fuck? It's like, well, I think, just based on, like, how we perceive reality now, the likelihood, especially from my perspective and the truth factors and whatnot, deities probably do exist to some degree. Just because you're aligning your truth factor and you're with them and you're affecting the quote-unquote fields to then harmonize with them to some degree. And then you become a dual field effect. I don't know what that means. I'm just saying things just because my brain is coming up with different ways to interpret reality through a more dual field effect. Again, I don't feel like having to explain everything. My head is having trouble explaining. I see it. It's just like hard to put into English at times. Of course, if my vocabulary were a little bit more expansive, then maybe I wouldn't have as much trouble. Like, I don't know, like somebody that's, I think I would consider to be verbally intelligent more than me would be Jordan Peterson. I think, I don't know, but he also has he has a lot more practice than I do. He's a communicator. He takes it seriously as opposed to me. I just like playing around with abstractions in my head, and I happen to not really enjoy talking about it all the time. But here I am in front of a camera just to organize all the thoughts. Yeah. That probably doesn't make sense to anybody else except for me. Maybe a theoretical physicist would maybe, like, because they actually have an understanding. I think a theoretician or theoretical physicist would understand what I'm trying to say, and they'd probably be able to explain it in a lot more concise manner than me, because this is all it's very new to me, and I'm still trying to organize all the information in my head to properly articulate it. But yeah, I think again, these theoreticians. I think theoreticians are, again, more likely to be open to the idea of spirituality or a higher power and all that, just because they use the they're using the same abstractions as me, and it's all going to the same conclusion. So if you even have half a brain, I think they'd understand that. Yeah, I'm not really a big fan of atheists. Also, I don't know, like, what atheists, I guess, again, atheists tend to not like Christianity, right? They don't like the idea of there being some kind of anthropomorphic God out there. Although this theory would suggest that would also be the case to some degree. Because we can imagine it, right? So it does exist. It's just, it happens to not be, something we can, I don't know. I don't want to talk about those things because I think it's kind of dumb when people talk about these things. I guess that's why I don't really like analyzing religion, because I feel like there are more productive things to do than analyzing religion. Maybe I'm wrong. I just don't care about looking at all the quote-unquote homomorphisms of what reality is and how other people see it, and it seems like they're just throwing shit at each other pretty much. So it just seems like pointless bantering to me. and I would say more egotistical to quote unquote intellectuals that like to talk about those things. But um, I really don't like most smart people to have an ego, because for their ego to form, they have to like have they have to look below them to keep their ego intact, because if they look above, they'd realize that there are people a trillion times smarter than them. So they don't like being humbled. That's why they always throw shit down at people that are supposedly less knowledgeable than them and whatnot. I mean, that can also be argued with, and it's just stupid. I just think most of it's pretty stupid. But also that's why I don't like. And also, like, when you think about education and indoctrination education, you get a lot of those. Way too many people, like, their egos are ginormous. Like, how do you blindside yourself so much to the point where your ego actually gets that big? Like, how are you that delusional? Like, how are you that delusional? Like, I don't understand. Anyways, I could argue about that for a while, but and it kind of, like, me complaining about people like that is also kind of annoying too. It's unproductive, which is why I've got to focus this worry on and whatnot, and worry about. Yeah, I think that's all I really have to say for now. And also, I guess there was somebody, the concept of death. Yeah. No, I'm not going to think about that. I was thinking about it earlier, and I had a good. I'm sorry. Anybody that ponders about death is just. I just think it's unproductive. I really think it's unproductive if you even ponder about death at this point. Like, I mean, we can talk about it from like a consciousness point of view and whatnot, and I'm just too tired to even talk about it right now. I had like a little bit of a monologue in my head yesterday about it when I saw somebody talking about death and super consciousness and all that, and I just don't feel like having to think about that right now, or even I don't even remember what I was thinking of, and what was I thinking about? Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, it's a good point that people actually think about. It's like, okay, so again, like they think about super consciousness and then somehow having an afterlife, which is a great thing to think about, of course. But the thing is, like, when you think about that, the infinite perceptions of God itself, and it's okay. Like, there are alternate states of reality as well that are interesting. So that like you can think of like these altered states that there are a lot of very scary not that great altered states that happen to exist, which I feel bad for certain people. But at the same time, you won't remember who you were. Like, you simply won't remember who you were because of the fact that there's no way. I don't think there is a way to remember who you are in a new afterlife or another altered state of reality that's different from this one. And I still don't really understand. I just haven't really. I don't know. I'm not going to say anything because, again, I'm not much of a spiritualist, and I don't like thinking about, like, there are infinite perceptions. It's like, why would there be a probability in which you would go to another altered a state of consciousness that leads you to maybe I'm wrong. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just not going to say anything. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's pointless thinking about some of those things. But that's only because I like thinking about, physics and mathematics and things that happen to be more applicable to the world that we live in. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this topic of death and, all this stuff. And the constant flux of change in the world. And but it's still an interesting concept to think about because you also have to think about like it is okay. I can agree that it is a good point to think about because of from the outside perspective, you can just think of it as like a mush of organic masses. Like so, you would become like that particular thing that mush that is still sensory perception to a degree. I think not to this degree, but it's still perceiving to a degree. But from the perspective of those given objects, it would be interesting to see is like do these objects actually have some form of, they probably don't. I mean, I like to not think that they don't have a form of sentience because I'm pretty neglectful towards my inanimate objects that I have. So, but it's just I just don't like thinking about it because they're again infinite possibilities. Okay, maybe not infinite. A lot of possibilities, maybe potentially close to infinite, depending on like you could think of it as like the flow of information, right? There has to be a certain amount of information input for there to be a very unlikely thing to happen, which is why people talk about miracles and all that. Miracles do occur. They do. It seems like they do, which is why, of course, a lot of people. This is why I'm thinking about it from a more metaphysical point of view, but still from the lens of mathematics and logic. So it's so cool to think about at times, but my head is like burning up from other things that seem to be more interesting to me, I guess. So, I mean, I don't even know why I brought up the topic of death. Anyways, I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye.